Hey class, Laurel again. I want to introduce you to a tree that you probably already know to some extent, but that actually is a little bit trickier to identify than it might seem. This is Douglas-fir, Pseudotsuga menzii, super fun scientific name. And Douglas-fir is a common early successional species. So it likes sun, but it can tolerate a wide range of conditions. It's really important from an ecological standpoint, and especially because it creates nurse logs, which I think Tim's going to be talking about in another video, and habitat for other plants. Now, the ways that you might identify Douglas-fir in a forest, oftentimes you're not going to see the foliage if it's a more mature specimen, but it gets these really deep fissures in the bark, and this can kind of tell you that it's a Doug-fir. And so they're wide fissures and they get deeper and wider as the tree matures. This isn't even that large of a Doug-fir. They can get really, really big, and they can live up to 1,000 years old. What we want you to do is learn how to identify it from the foliage, because that's going to be present even in younger specimens. Okay, so what you're going to look for is the needles are kind of, they're your typical kind of two-sided needles that we tend to see in things like the true firs, which this is not. That's actually part why it's called Pseudotsuga. Pseudotsuga actually means false hemlock, so that makes even less sense because this does tend to sort of look like a fir, not really a hemlock. So it's got these two-sided needles and these pointy, scaly buds. Take a look at that bud. And again, there'll be pictures for you to look at as well in the PowerPoint. Here's another specimen to show you. So again, look at those really scaly, pointy buds. That's definitely going to be your best key for identification. But some other things in your toolkit for figuring out whether it's a Doug-fir are things to make sure it doesn't have. So the needles will never have any white banding on the top. They do on the underside a little bit, kind of light banding. Those are stomatal bands. And the needles will never be notched. They're not sharp. They're not sharp like a spruce, but they are never notched. While other species that are in the true fir genus sometimes have notched needles, like grand fir, which is another one you'll be learning. And we aren't going to test you on cones, but I still want to show you the cones because they're really distinctive. Here's one. Okay, so the cones of Doug-fir are really cool because they look like the rear end of little mice with their little feet and tails sticking out. Okay, and the reason I'm showing this to you is partly so you can identify it perhaps by its cones if in a situation to do so. Here, get some focus on this. But the other reason is because you can sort of like connect the various features of Doug-fir because of this. So according to legend, nobody actually really knows where this story originated, but supposedly there was a really big fire in the forest, and all the mice went running to Douglas-fir, to hide in its bark and hide in its cones and stay safe. And the reason that is important to mention rather than just being a silly anecdote is that Douglas-fir is very resistant to fire. It has that really thick bark that I showed you, and thick corky bark, and it tends to lose its lower limbs as it grows taller because it does like the sun. And so that means that fire can't climb it as easily. So because it's able to survive fires more easily than a lot of other species, then you can remember that it was a safe haven for the little mice, and that's why you see their thumbs sticking out of the cone.